Final sitting day and everything else, the headlines around the country, we'll get across them now. Daily Telegraph's journalist James Willis, who had a front page today, we'll get into that too. Deputy Executive Director of the IPA, Daniel Wild, welcome to you both, gentlemen. Let's start. That deal done on the guillotine motion between Labor and the Greens. Now, a guillotine motion for people at home is that you agree that all these bills will go into a set time period, so debate is cut off. They're basically put on through the Senate, forced into a vote. There's no discussion, very little amendments, if any. That was done, 30-something pieces of legislation. Now, James, I'm not going to be a hypocrite here and say that guillotines haven't been used before, but it is unusual to see one of this size. 30 bills in it. That says to me, when I used to run the Senate program for Robert Hill, who was the Senate leader, Labor's been lousy at managing its time to get to this point in the calendar and have to ram all of this through. This looks to me, again, they are clearing the decks for an early election. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a fair take, Peter. And I think once again, we are seeing that they are incapable of doing anything without getting into bed with the Greens, who the majority of Australians did not vote for. But the reality is, with the Greens controlling the Senate, Adam Bandt is most probably the most powerful politician in the country. And so to get this legislation through and they get a bit of a pat on the back to say, oh, we passed all these bills without proper debate, without proper scrutiny, God knows what is in some of these bills. The devil will be in the detail, I suppose. But once again, they have had to make concessions to the Greens, which are not in the best interest of Australia. There's a massive social housing energy fund. Good luck to that. I think the proof will be in the pudding there. But critically, they've had to allow strict laws to come into place that will stop, basically choke foreign investment on coal and gas. It's a sovereign risk, once again, scaring off foreign investors and local investors with this fund and the deal they've had to do there. So, look, they might get a pat on the back on the way out the door on the last day, but I think it's a very, very concerning deal for Australia. And once again, Adam Bandt pulling all the strings in Canberra.
Yeah, I just want to underscore this for people at home. What James is talking about there is not that the Parliament was doing its job, that it should do anyway, to look at legislation in an orderly way, but there was a blood price paid on this package of legislation by the government with your money. $500 million, so $500 million put on the table for social housing upgrades, as if we're not spending enough there anyway. No coal, oil or gas funding to come out of the future Made in Australia bills. They were in the package. Reforms to the RBA back on the table. An end to commercial financing of fossil fuel projects overseas and more. Daniel Wild, this is what makes policy people like you and me so angry. This is a bastardisation of the Parliament.
Well, that's right. I think it's a bad day for democracy and a bad day for Australia. I think it sort of bookends the 47th Parliament of the Commonwealth of Australia, which has been a very bad parliament for our country. This is a government that is much more radical than Whitlam. I think you did a great job in your monologue in outlining all of the various policies that have not served our national interest. There's been a lack of debate. We've seen this with the social media ban proposal with just 24 hours consultation and a 3-hour Senate committee hearing process for a policy that would change the regulatory architecture of how Australians access the internet. We've seen it with misinformation laws, where they had just a 1-week consultation period for the second incarnation of those laws. And indeed, it goes to the whole energy policy agenda that we've been discussing and mass migration. Australians never voted for mass migration. We've had over 1 million migrants arrive here on a net basis under this government. As you identified, this is making us poorer with 6 consecutive quarters of negative per capita growth, plus the social and cultural problems that we have. There's been no debate about this policy and many others, Peter. So I think that this chaotic end to what is the 47th Parliament of Australia, in all likelihood, they might have a couple of sitting days next year to get the budget through. But I think it bookends a very bad period of time for our nation.
And look, even after we saw what we saw yesterday in Sydney, broadly across New South Wales, I think Wagga was in a lot of trouble as well in terms of energy security. We still had that clown of a Minister, Chris Bowen, in the Parliament today, puffing up his chest, talking about his climate change report, with my colleague Laura Jays banging on again about renewables. Have a listen to this.
The only reason we've got the power on at the moment, the only reliable system that you can call on is coal. You can't tell me when the wind's going to blow and the sun's going to shine.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you when the rain's going to fall either, Laura, but we
That's
drink
right.
water every day.
But that's what goes to the whole reliability issue, doesn't it?
It does, and that's why we're going to build, and we are building, the transmission and the storage.
I mean, all this BS about batteries. It'll run about 100 dishwashers if he's lucky for 5.5 minutes. It was a sunny day in Sydney yesterday. Renewables failed Sydney yesterday. This is the point. You've been running hard on this, James. The Telegraph's covered it again today. What's the latest?
Well, in the last 24 hours in New South Wales, coal has been responsible, black coal, for between 66 and 68% of our energy mix. The Premier, Chris Minns, acknowledged yesterday that when solar was coming offline at about 3 o'clock, that the solar and the renewables wouldn't be able to do the heavy lifting. So he asked people as a result to be careful with their air cons and their dishwashers between 3 and 8 yesterday. I think this has been hidden for a few years. I spoke to Paul Broad yesterday, an infrastructure expert, a veteran at this game. He said that because of some mild summers, we actually haven't seen the looming crisis here. But ultimately, Peter, in New South Wales, we do have coal plants. They were all sold off by the former coalition government. The process started by Labor before that. And because they are owned by the private sector, they haven't been invested in. So they are ageing. And the government, led by Chris Bowen, has been able to sit there and say, well, sorry, coal can't keep the lights on. It's absolute bogus. The only reason that coal hasn't been able to do the heavy lifting is because these coal plants are ageing. The government has scared off any investment in them and refuses to go anywhere near coal. So we're having to, go hard on renewable energies, which is simply incapable of keeping the lights on. So this problem is years ahead if we continue down this path without some sensible investment, and defies what is happening all over the world.
I get a real sense now, and I'm going to talk to an expert in a moment about the state of play. And look, I don't like saying it was the Liberal government that sold them off. Let's make it clear. It was Matt Keane, Labor's patsy on the climate board now, that sold them off. But I think punters, ordinary people, are really starting to understand this complex argument. For too long, the complexity has shut them out of the detail. Now they're starting to understand it. They are living through the reality. They're seeing their bills. They're hearing these warnings about dishwashers. I think this is going to be a huge issue in the campaign, and it is not going to be good, not just for Labor, but it's not going to be good either for the Greens. Hey, Lydia Thorp, I'm not going to waste a lot of time talking about her, but I do want to point to comments she's made. She got into the chamber, or the chamber edges at least. The security guards were called, yelling out her obscenities about Palestine. But she also had this to say when she stopped by the ABC studios. Have a listen.
It seems like there's one rule for white people who get away with racism, and there's one rule for us. When we call that out, we're the ones that are the naughty little black girl again.
I mean, Dan, she threw documents at another senator. She flipped the bird as she walked out to the President of the Senate. This has nothing to do with race.
Well, that's right, Peter. I don't know why the ABC is giving her a platform to say those things, to be honest with you. Look, I've made this point before, and it's important to make it again. The Senate plays such an important role in our democracy. As you know, it's the House of Review. It's there to review legislation that comes out of the House of Representatives. It's there to deliberate, to undertake inquiries and committee hearings into legislation that affects the lives of every single Australian. We were just talking about the problems in the Senate with them guillotining debate and pushing through over 30 pieces without any meaningful debate. Now more than ever, our country needs political representatives, no matter what side you're on, that will do their job. That will be the House of Review and the House to represent the state's interests, which is what it's set up to do. Instead, it's becoming more and more like a circus. I think a lot of Australians look at this behaviour, and again, I say this regardless of what side you're on, and they say, well, we've got all these problems in our nation. We can barely defend ourselves. We've got an economy that's going backwards. We've got a culture and society that's divided. Yet this is occupying the time of senators. There's only 76 senators in our country. Every one of them has a role to play. And I think Australians expect a lot better than this kind of behaviour. I
tell you, if you put up a referendum right now for Senate reform, I think it would carry. I think Australians have had enough. It used to be a genteel house. I mean, when I worked in the Senate in the Howard era, there was a lot of collaboration across the aisle to make legislation better, to improve it, to amend it. There were Fed income inquiries that used to go around the country. Now that crazy bottom of the horseshoe, it's just stunt after stunt after stunt from a motley crew of people that you'd find in I was going to say an asylum. I don't even know we have them anymore, but we certainly have one in Canberra.